Are QPR in trouble heading into next season? Let's talk about it. Alright guys, plenty going on at QPR at the moment. I thought this one deserved an individual video because I'm seeing so much on social media at the moment, the way they ended last season and everything that's already gone on in the summer so far. I just find QPR a fascinating club heading into next season. Now I will be doing a few of these deeper dives on individual championship clubs throughout the summer. If you'd like to see one done on your club, then do let me know in the comments down below. But for the sake of today's video, we're here to talk about QPR. So to paint the overall context on where QPR are at this point in time, they last played in the Premier League in 2014/15, and since then they've spent their last 8 seasons as a championship club. In 5 of those 8 seasons, QPR have finished in the bottom half of the championship, but last season's finish of 20th was the lowest they've finished since their relegation from the Premier League. And it's also worth pointing out that they would have finished 21st had Reading not been given that 6-point deduction. Now of course, teams can use that low point as a motivation to kick on and go again next season, but all the messages we're getting out of QPR at the moment I'm finding a little bit worrying. Let's first of all go back to last season and describe how that unfolded. Michael Beale was hired at the beginning of this season and seen as a positive and exciting coach who could take that squad on, as things had fallen a little bit stale under Mark Warburton in the previous season. Now Beale started fantastically well and even had QPR at the top of the championship on game week 16, although things did start to take a little bit of a turn for the worse when he was linked with the Wolves job, although nothing materialised on that front in the end, and Beale doubled down and committed his future to QPR. That didn't last long though, as the slide continued and Beale quickly jumped ship, moving over to Rangers in Scotland. And this is where QPR's problems really started to begin. Neil Critchley then took the job on in December, but only lasted 12 games in the dugout after a promising start and beating Preston in his first game. He'd then go winless in his next 11 matches as QPR boss, and suddenly they were facing the perils of relegation. Gareth Ainsworth then came in for the final 13 games of the season, and while he did keep QPR up, his spell so far has been by no means miraculous, winning just 3 of his 13 games in charge. The major worry for QPR is just how much their levels dropped off throughout the 22/23 campaign, to have gone from top of the championship on game week 15 to then rock bottom of the championship form table from November to the end of the campaign, picking up a measly 20 points from their final 29 championship matches. To put that into context, that's just 0.68 points per game, which projected over an entire season would represent just 31 points. Taking Gareth Ainsworth's spell so far with QPR in isolation, he picked up just 11 points from the 13 games he had in charge, which is just 0.84 points per game, and projected over an entire season would see them picking up just 38 points. So in other words, pretty much all the underlying metrics for QPR in the second half of last season were absolutely abysmal. Now Ainsworth himself did recently appear on TalkSport, and this clip of him has gone semi-viral.
Right. I've seen that championship, by the way. Have you seen that?
Don't do it yourself. Don't do it yourself. Give yourself a 2-week stop.
Wow.
And relentless. 2 games every week. Bang, bang,
where's
bang.
the small teams now? Where have they gone? Ipswich have come up. Leicester have come down. Leeds have come down. Southampton have come down. I'm scared.
Actually,
admitting you're scared before a championship season probably hasn't boded all too well with the QPR fans. Now in terms of my own personal perspective on Ainsworth, I'm a Preston fan, and as a man, I mean, I absolutely love the guy. I think he's brilliant. I do think he's a straight talker. He had Wycombe punching well above their weight, and I know they were a little bit of a Marmite side because of their style of play, very direct, obviously, when we saw them in the championship. But Ainsworth to me is a lovable manager that you can get behind, and I do think that those comments there were made in jest. But there are overarching points which were sort of touched on by Ainsworth throughout that interview, which I think will crop up throughout the season. I love Ainsworth as a character, and I certainly don't for 1 second underestimate his managerial abilities, but I still have some reservations whether he's the right man for this club right now. Now something that Ainsworth did touch on in that TalkSport interview was player sales. He did hint to the fact that there will be several outgoings at QPR this summer, and we've already seen that begin. When the club originally released their retained list, they released 6 players at the end of the season, with probably Luke Amos being the most notable of those names, but it's the spine of the QPR squad which has already begun to be picked away at. Yesterday on the Championship Transfer Rumour Roundup, we touched on Rob Dickie and his links to Bristol City. Well, that deal has since gone through. Rob Dickie is now a Bristol City player, and everything we're currently hearing from behind the scenes at QPR, it does seem as if he will be the first of many out the door this summer. If we have a quick scan over the QPR squad as things stand and players who have a contract which is expiring in 2024, that currently applies to 12 first team players, and of the players on on that list, I mean, we've already seen Dickey depart, and I think we could see several others follow in his footsteps. Chris Willock's form took a tail off in the second half of the season. I'd be amazed if he was still a QPR player at the start of next season. Sonny Dieng has been linked with a move away, as has Lyndon Dykes as well. Now, something that is important to stress is it's certainly not a bad thing that QPR could be getting rid of all these players. After all, they were part of a squad which vastly underperformed last season. I think you could make genuine arguments that it is time to move quite a few of those players on. But when your club's in such a rut, as could be applied to QPR at the moment, to go through such a rebuild when the Championship is looking as competitive as it's going to be next season, and you're trying to scramble together a squad on a really limited budget with a manager who definitely hasn't got everything in place just yet, suddenly the alarm bells do go off to me that that's screaming aside who is going to be right up against it in terms of battling relegation next season. Now, a comparison I'd make between this QPR squad and the rebuild they're attempting this summer would probably be to where Cardiff were last summer. They had a hell of a lot of outgoings at the club. Steve Morrison had obviously tried to put his stamp of authority on things, and they brought in 17 new players on really what was a shoestring budget, the majority of those players being signed as free transfers or low undisclosed fees. What we saw in the end from Cardiff was them just about limping over the line to survival, thanks to Reading's point deduction in the end and 3 different managers being in the dugout throughout the season. So Cardiff showed that overall squad rebuild on a budget is just about doable. My concern then comes from the fact that I think the bottom of the table is going to be a hell of a lot more competitive this time around than it was last season. Let's not forget, last season we had Reading and Wigan both being hit by point deduction, and Blackpool, who were in a mess for the vast majority of the season. I'm not sure we're going to get all of those favourable scenarios playing out this season for other sides battling relegation. Now, going back to QPR player sales for this summer, undoubtedly their prized asset is Ilias Chair. Now, QPR do hold the advantage that he is contracted with the club until 2025 and so shouldn't leave for a reduced fee, and you'd think they'd be able to get a decent chunk of change for him should they decide to go ahead and cash in. We've already had strong links to Leicester City, who have been sniffing around the playmaker. And let's not get it twisted, losing a player like Chair would be a massive blow for QPR. Last season, he was by far and away their most creative player, finishing the season with 5 goals and 9 assists, creating 2.4 chances per game. Although you could maybe argue that in Ainsworth's more direct style, he's not a natural fit into that, and they look for creative players in other positions in the market. But Chair and Willock both potentially leaving this summer does leave a massive hole to be plugged. What I then found quite interesting was I had a gander at the current relegation odds for the Championship next season, and QPR actually escaped the bottom 3 of the bookies' current predictions for relegation. They fancy Plymouth, Rotherham, Birmingham and Huddersfield to have a greater chance of the drop going into next season than QPR currently do. Myself personally, I'm not quite sure I agree with that summary. Now, obviously the bookies' prices will change continuously until we get to the start of the season, and a lot of it is based on how much money people are putting on certain sides to be relegated. But it is always an interesting indicator at the start of the season nonetheless. As things stand, the bookies currently have QPR priced up at 10-3 to be relegated next season. But like I said before, the bookies do see the likes of Plymouth, Rotherham, Birmingham and Huddersfield as more likely to drop at this stage. So where do I personally stand on all of this at the moment with QPR? I'd say my biggest concern with the club at the moment is that they do go down the route of having this overall squad exodus. It's a total squad rebuild. The spine of that squad is ripped away and sold off to fellow Championship clubs, and they try and bundle together a squad in the mould of Gareth Ainsworth and how he wants to go about his side playing for next season. And while it is absolutely the right thing to back your manager and get the type of players in that he wants to play with, my concern comes from the fact that I think there's a massive chance that QPR start this next campaign really poorly, on a similar run we saw them on at the end of last season under Ainsworth. First couple of months don't go to plan, they then sack Ainsworth and they're left with a squad which has been built in his mould, and they're no longer with him, and they try and flip the formula again and they go down a different route with a new manager. That would be my main concern, that they go for an overall squad rebuild, start next season poorly, sack Ainsworth, and then are sort of left in no man's land. But I do welcome some QPR fans' thoughts on the club and the current state of it in the comments down below. I think it's going to be an absolutely fascinating summer, and I am going to keep a close eye on QPR and all of their transfer dealings. If you want to keep up with QPR and their transfer dealings, then make sure to stay subscribed to the channel. where we will have all of the regular updates coming up on the Championship transfer rumour roundup, players QPR are linked to and players QPR will be selling. But that will wrap it up for today's video, guys. Bit of a different one and a deeper dive into one individual Championship club. Like I said at the start of the video, if you'd like to see this style of video for any other side in the Championship this season, then do let me know down below. But apart from that, thank you very much for watching. Make sure to stay subscribed for some Championship content, and I'll see you all in the next one.